My name is Beverly Baker, and I'm the Chair of the Older Women's Network New South Wales and the President of the National Older Women's Network. It gives me the greatest pleasure to welcome you all here today as we discuss this important issue of the cashless debit card. It might interest you to know that in 2018, the Older Women's National Conference unanimously rejected the expansion and rollout of this Indue Card, and especially as it might impact on the age pension. But before we start, I would like to acknowledge that wherever we are today, we are meeting on Aboriginal land. I'm on the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I offer my respects to elders past and present. I recognise that this land was never ceded. This it was, is, and always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you. Now to start, and again, it gives me the most great pleasure to introduce Professor Shirley Randell. Shirley is a National Ambassador for the National Older Women's Network. Shirley has a long history of working towards gender equality, of working for human rights, and of working for civil rights across all areas. She has an awesome knowledge, and we are really grateful for her to be chairing this session for us. I will now hand it over to Shirley so she may introduce our participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beverly. And Budjeri Gamarua, thank you for the acknowledgement of country. And can I congratulate you, Beverly, as a recently elected president of the National Older Women's Network. We look forward to your usual inspiring leadership. And I also am speaking today on the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation. I'm just delighted to be your facilitator for this timely and significant discussion on poverty, the Indue Card, and women's rights. This issue is of particular interest to me as ambassador of NOWN, the National Older Women's Network, and as a member of OWN New South Wales, the Older Women's Network in this state. NOWN is run by and for older women, promoting their rights, dignity, and well-being. Other women's networks in each state are composed of groups that offer a range of activities, such as guest speakers, discussions, outings, film and book groups, and facilitated classes. The National Network is particularly involved in advocacy for older women. I have a lifelong interest and action in poverty and women's rights. And I also understand that the Indue Card is most harmful to First Nations people, particularly, another important focus of my life's work. And our webinar today embraces all three of those interests. I must say that I've not paid enough attention to the Indue Card, so our conversation will be important for me. Nearly 150 people have registered for today's forum, affirming the need for understanding the issues involved in the Indue Card and finding out more about its impact on Aboriginal, but Australian people now. When I came back to Australia, it was being implemented only in the Aboriginal communities, but that has changed. Now we have two very experienced women sharing their knowledge with us this morning. Kathryn Wilkes is the coordinator of the No Cashless Debit Card Australian community, and she's spoken on this issue many times in the government Senate inquiries. Kathryn is an advocate for people forced onto the cashless debit card across the country and was among the first people in Australia to alert us to the issues and problems with the card. Amanda Smith is the convener of the Say No 7 resources page, an online community consisting of over 1,100 group members. And she's also coordinator of the No Cashless Debit Card Australia. Amanda has been researching and posting on the cashless debit card policy and legislation for 6 years and has also spoken in the Senate several times. In this conversation, I'm going to ask Amanda and Kathryn some questions, no doubt showing my unfamiliarity of this topic, and hopefully my questions may be some of the ones you might also have about the card. You will all have the opportunity to add some questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. Of course, you may also want to use the chat box to share any thoughts or reflections you might have during the presentations, but it would be helpful if specific questions could be added to Q&A. I'll be monitoring this after my questions are answered by either Amanda or Kathryn. So Amanda, I'm beginning with you. I have a Westpac debit card and at times find this very useful. Can you please tell us what is the difference between the bank debit card that many of us are often using in our daily lives and the cashless debit card? And why do some people call it the Indue Card? Are there any restrictions placed particularly on that card?
Thank you very much, Shirley, and to Owen New South Wales for hosting this webinar. I'm speaking from Wurundjeri Land, home of the Kulin Nations. I am a guest on unceded territory. To answer this question, it's a normal cashless debit card is not part of a compulsory income management program, and that is the basic difference. You would go to your bank, you would have full control over your account if you have a normal debit card. No one telling you what to spend, when to spend it, your own budgeting limits. When you are put on a cashless debit card, you immediately become part of the compulsory income management program, which is where somebody else takes your control over where you spend your income. In this case, it is the government, and it is a private company called Indue Limited, which is where the Indue Card comes from. There are, from the get-go, as you can see, by being placed on an income management program and being compelled to use Indue Limited as your provider, your banking and financial services rights are immediately withdrawn. You don't get a choice. You don't get to go to a different financial services provider to do your exchange and your banking. Immediately, you are compelled by law to engage with Visa, to engage with Indue, and that is how it begins. There are a number of differences between, of incidental differences that together make up a major problem. Things like fraud and chargeback services are not applied equally to card holders versus somebody on a debit card. The cashless debit card infringes upon your economic, banking, privacy and human rights, whereas a normal card wouldn't. And you're certainly not compelled to go and get a debit card at your local bank by a government. You're not forced to do that under duress. And in this case, people being forced onto the cashless debit card are being placed under duress. They're being held what we say economic hostages. You either activate the card and use this product, or you lose 80% of your payment. Even when you do activate the card and go on, the discrimination there doesn't stop, and the differences don't stop. Your credit rating and your freedom to transfer money between accounts is limited on this program. Compulsory income management means that you lose ownership of the 80% of your income. Currently, Social Security law transfers a payment from consolidated revenue and gives it to you where it becomes your income. There is a Social Security process that makes it from a government money to your money. That process doesn't apply anymore to you, and it instead gives the money to Indue Limited, who then legally own 80% of your pension or your payment. So that's the huge thing. A normal cashless debit card wouldn't claim ownership over your income, and this one does. So keeping things brief, because I know we only have an hour, I will leave it at that for now, Shirley. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Amanda. Now,
sorry, I'm nervous.
Kathryn, can you tell us how these spending restrictions actually play out in people's lives? And
okay,
you might provide some examples of how women's lives in particular are impacted by using that card.
Thank you, Shirley. I'm on Bachelor land up here in Queensland. With the restrictions, you've got rental allowances. A lot of people may not fall into their fixed signed lease requirements. So therefore, anybody who's in share housing, boarding, has a periodic lease or does direct transfer and pays cash rentals, a lot of people can't do it. So they end up, depending on their situation, being forced to pay their rent with doing the shopping and paying other people's bills in lieu of paying rents, or going homeless, which we've seen happen with a lot of people. So the rental allowance issue is a big problem. Indue also are not very timely, and usually when people are trying to set up their rent allowances, there is a delay for the ones that do get approved, and they end up like 4 days behind in rent, and they stay behind in rent. And Indue won't let you catch up that money. Landlords get annoyed with constant rents being late or not being paid at all, which leads to breaches in your tenancy agreement, which leads to evictions. So that's one instance. Other restrictions are, well, the restrictions on access to cash, especially if you're in a domestic violence situation, you're trying to get out. You need every penny that you can muster to get away. And even if you do get somewhere, you're going to walk into, say, transitional housing or crisis housing, you're going to walk into an empty house. You need the ability to be able to jump online, buy a fridge, buy a bed. You can't do that. And, you know, your 20% is not going to cover you. And then you're in a position of having to beg to try and get extra cash, get permission. And the way that they do it is you've got to contact, you know, you've got to provide the details of the seller of the goods and put the application in and give all of the seller's information as well. A lot of people just don't do it. You know what I mean? It's just too difficult. So trying to resettle is a really big issue, right? If you've got, I had one person who was in an abusive relationship, and basically using fear, of course, coercive control, her partner took her card and he had access to her portal. And he was the one who actually had an addiction, and he was working, so he wasn't on a benefit. But he took her card and he used her funds. So that, you know, keeps her trapped in poverty and keeps her trapped. Also, a lot of hotels, motels, and a lot of caravan parks are on the banned list. They don't accept the card. So on top of that, you've got so many things that women can't pay. Daycare fees if you've got children. Car repayment loans, depending on the finance company, the only approved company is Money3 at 24.95% interest. Everybody else, you're told to use your cash portion to pay for the expenses that Indue refused to cover for you. Well, a lot of people can't afford to pay rent or daycare or car loans and other personal debts or whatever on their 20%. So we've had a few people go bankrupt as a result and lose their vehicles. It's just disgusting. People have to, like, I've had people who have had to flee and they've had to get on a plane and they've had to beg and they have to prove everything. They have to send through the copy of the flight details and where they're going and itinerary, and to try and get access to the funds. And I was in a situation years ago where I walked into transitional housing, empty house, and I had 6 weeks until I was eligible for my advance payment. And so we sat on the floor for 6 weeks. But when that money came, I was able to draw that money out the bank, head to the garage sales and buy what I needed. Cheap lounge, dining room table, beds, and get it all delivered. You know what I mean? You can't do that with this card, because 100% of a woman's advance goes on the card. You know, and their family tax benefits, supplements at the end of the year goes on the card at 100%. So that's just some examples of how restrictive it is.
If I can interject just to round that up, that when you go on a card, you're not only bound by the government's limitations and restrictions on what you can buy and where and how, you're actually also bound by 89 pages of Indue Limited terms and conditions, so corporate terms and conditions as well. When you, your 80% is quarantined, and then in the this is the categories inside the actual account that Indue set up for you without your consent. Your spending is put into categories like housing, groceries, discretionary spending, and you can't actually spend any more than that's in that category at any time. And if you need more in a category like groceries, you need an extra $50, you do have to ring up and ask permission to transfer money from discretionary spending into the other account. So the restrictions are on money orders, on gift cards. It's not just simply preventing you from buying gambling products or alcohol products. It's about cards declining. There has been 890,000 card declines for 86% of which were non-prohibited items. So the card is declining all over the place for items that people can normally buy. When we're talking about restrictions, there is the ones that government impose, and then we're talking about restrictions that the realities of trying to use this card in the public sphere imposes. So, sorry, Kathryn.
That's right. So getting back to that, it often will decline in the shops when somebody's trying to do their shopping. And we've had instances where only the Indue Card's gone down at Woolies and they've put it over the loudspeaker telling everybody the Indue Card doesn't work. And people have to literally just leave their shopping and walk out.
Yeah. That's actually a very common experience. We hear that too.
Yeah. Oh, if it's declining and playing up, people behind the person will start, oh, you've got the druggie card. You've got the druggie card. And why don't you get a job? That's my tax dollars. They start heckling the people on the card. So there's a stigma issue as well, which causes a lot of trauma. And we found a lot of women, I say women because this does, it does impact the men as well, but it's mainly the women and the children that go do the shopping.
And women in caring roles as well.
Thank you both for that. Now, Amanda, I want to go on with you because since the 1960s, women have been marching for their liberation. I joined in some of these marches when I came back to Australia in the 1970s and in every decade since then, including a couple of months ago, to be free from all the controls imposed on us. Yet, Amanda, I hear that this card is being used to control women's spending, and you've mentioned that. Even their bras, as indicated in the advertisement for this seminar today. Can you please tell us about this woman who had to get permission to buy a bra?
Yes, Bianca's story actually made it to Senate, which we're really proud for her that she was actually heard in the Senate and on the chamber floor of the House of Representatives as well. It's a little embarrassing, but what you have to understand as this card blocks your access to eBay, Amazon, D-Shop, Kogan, Gumtree. I've got the list here of places that so PayPal and eBay are banned, but this person was put on a card, placed on a card in an out of trial area and went to make a purchase of a bra. It's easy for women of small bust size to go to Kmart, and the card very rarely declines at those places like Kmart and Target and conglomerate stores. But when a woman needs a specialty item, especially a big busted woman, and I'm a little blushing, but Bianca has given me permission to share her story today. Bianca's stacked, and Bianca needed a specialised bra from the UK to help her posture and her body, not just for looks and for comfort. The payment was denied, so she had to ring up Indue Limited and asked about it. And I actually have her words here. I'm just going to, sorry, I'm having to scroll back. Basically, when a payment is declined and you need to find out why, you have to ring the hotline number to find out what's going on, or to have a merchant placed on the accepted list. You actually have to go through this enormous process. And what she found was that, I'm just reading her words here, she was told that she would have to send a screenshot of her bra that she wanted to purchase, sign an affidavit that that's what her money was being transferred to her account for. She had to wait approval for this purchase of the bra, and then wait the days that it would take to get funds put into her normal bank account. And she says here, I have a very large bust. In Australia, I would be lucky to find a bra in my size that is not only appealing to a woman of my age, but also for less than $100. Like, this is somebody on a payment. So somebody who's already got a limited amount of funds. She found the perfect bra for her on this UK site and went to purchase it for half the price. So support and quality were just as important because of her bust size. When she realised that she had to do this, she says, for me, even the thought of the situation of having to send a photograph of her bra to somebody made her cringe. She has no idea who that screenshot would have had to go to. They have all of my personal information. Indue do. They have access to every information that you've got on MyGov. So everything the department knows, Indue knows. The thought of having to ask permission and send through such personal image was cringeworthy and scary because they know who I am, how old I am, where I live, my email address. When I was told that information, my knee-jerk reaction was to be a smarty pants and ask about what if I wanted to buy an adult toy from a marital aid from a toy store. She was given the same response, that you would have to send in a photograph of what you want to buy. And she says, this is absolutely and utterly appalling in every sense. I literally cannot express my utter discomfort and disgust. This information for my bra and intimate items was given to her by Selena, who was a CDC Indue Card hotline supervisor at the time. So there's the fear of not knowing who's getting this information. There is the fact that you have to ask permission at all to buy such an intimate product or any product. This same experience of having to sign an affidavit and give proof has applied everything from sorry, Kathryn, what was it? The car parts. You know, a gentleman was trying to buy car parts. Woman was trying to buy a bedroom setting secondhand for her children. And the Indue telephonist said, I'm sorry, it's too expensive. You can't afford that. Like somebody making an arbitrary decision about what that parent can afford. They have access to all your private data, and but more the concerning thing is that they are making arbitrary decisions outside of the legislation. The legislation simply bans digital currencies, money orders and gift cards. It bans access to alcohol and gambling products. Outside of that, there should be no restrictions at all. According to Anne Ruston, there isn't. Yet we have constant reports of experiences from people who are saying, no, I'm getting declined and banned all over the place. So eBay is definitely out. Amazon, most of the online shopping services are now banned. Kogan has just recently been banned. D-Shop is banned. Redbubble, all the things that we would do to give gifts to family members. And of course, gift cards. So the anchor's experience was horrifying. She ended up not making the purchase. So it's restraint of trade as well in a large degree. But her experience and the horror that she experienced when she realised that even if it was something even more intimate than a bra, she would still have to do that, is indicative of the kind of coercive control that's being applied. And the fact that this does apply to mothers trying to get a book for their children. We have an autistic child that needed a special book and she was denied access because they thought the mother could be purchasing a book that might have alcohol-related content. So it is completely bizarre, and while some of the experience we're describing are extreme, they are still common experiences. The government has tried to dismiss those experiences as rare events. It's like, no, they're extreme, but they're common. They are happening regularly to a lot of card holders. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Amanda, and also Bianca. That's extraordinary.
Yes, a brave woman, brave woman.
So, Kathryn, what else are you hearing from women who are on the Indue card?
Oh, the biggest issues are the rent issues and you never know when it's going to decline. So that started people suffering with anxiety, depression, ended up going to the doctors, being medicated, which then impacts physical health as well. We had one young woman who was only 33 years of age. She suffered a heart attack after being refused twice of her opt-outs. And she now suffers long-term permanent damage with broken heart syndrome and 3 leaking heart valves due to the stress. She did eventually get off the card, but now, like so many others, people who get off the card don't stand up and speak anymore because the minister has the power of putting people straight back on the card. So people are afraid of that. And considering that Indue keep the card accounts open for 7 years, even if you cut up the card, they keep the account open and they're getting paid for the next 7 years for you being off the card even. Right? There's just so many issues over the years. Like I had a working parent and she was living off of her savings. She didn't want to activate the card, and staff members at a Hervey Bay office activated without her consent. So she stuck her foot down and said, right, I'm not using the money. and she lived off her savings and her wages for the next 2.5 years. She fought them all the way. They tried to make up lies about her neglecting her children and not paying her debt repayments as excuses to not let her off the card. Meanwhile, the money that accumulated in the card was $35,000. Okay. She ended up taking it to AAT tribunal and she won straight away. It was overturned. There was no evidence of child neglect and there was no evidence of debt not being paid because she didn't have any debts. They got upset because she blacked out how much savings she had and they wanted to know on her bank statements, and because she refused to show them how much she had in savings, they made up rubbish. And they do that on a lot of the opt-out. It's any excuse. And yeah, it took her 2.5 years and all the way to AAT tribunal to get off the card. And even then they tried to manipulate that and say, we might have to repay you back in installments. And she said, no, I want my $35,000 in my bank, you know. We've got situations where older people, for instance, Jocelyn in Seduna, they've recently put her back on the card in March and she's 65 years of age. Her mobility scooter broke down. Now, the gentleman that fixes those things in Seduna doesn't take card. So she was in the embarrassing situation of having to borrow money off of a friend to pay to get her mobility scooter fixed. The problem with that is, since she's got to scratch her head, is how's she going to pay her friend back that cash? You know, she's going to have to do it over several weeks of a little bit out of her cash portion every fortnight to pay it back. One of the worst things I think I've heard so far is in the case of a young mum who was pregnant with twins and she lost the babies. Now, this woman went to Bundaberg from Brisbane. She was only in Bundaberg for 8 days and she returned back to Brisbane and she lost the babies. In that time, a card turned up in her letterbox. She was put on the cashless debit card, even though she wasn't living in Bundaberg. With that meant that her bereavement payment went 100% onto the cashless debit card. They refused her access to use it to pay for the funerary urns and the cremation of her twin babies. I think that's the lowest thing I've seen any company do. So she had no choice but to borrow the money from her mum. And then they refused her the ability to be able to transfer that money back to her mum because they were sitting on that 100% of her bereavement payment, which was supposed to assist with the funeral costs, but she couldn't access it. So she spent the next year or so paying her mum's bills, buying her mum's groceries, paying her mum's car rego to pay her mum back. But all of that in the grief of losing twin babies. Do you know what I mean? No compassion from the company whatsoever. And the staff, a lot of the staff have big chips on their shoulders. They'll tell people it's not your money. Well, if you don't like it, get a job. Well, getting a job hasn't saved people because a lot of people on the card have jobs. And if you're receiving a family payment and you're working, you're still on the card. As long as you're receiving $1 of Centrelink payment, right, which is your base payment, you're on the card. And it's so difficult for people to get off. And it really stuffs people's budgeting abilities up. A lot of people are very good at budgeting their money. But when you're trying to work and your income is up and down every fortnight, it's really difficult to work out. Half stuck on Indue, half in your bank, you're trying to pay rent and bills, but half your money is stuck and trapped, you know. And if you're a single woman in that situation, it really does stuff you up. If you don't have a working husband that can pick up the slack, you're in trouble. You know, disabled people and their carers, since the cancellation of the nominee status exemption, it's resulted in, whereas we had a situation where one of our people was a carer, she was on the card, her son was on disability, he wasn't on the card, but when they cancelled the nominee status, instead of her looking after his money for him, she's now got a card for him. So she's got to manage 2 Indue cards, which has completely stuffed up their financial budget for the household.
And NDIS payments as well on top.
Well, no, well, yeah, because Minderoo did raise the concern of people that have access to the NDIS funding to pay their bills. They're trying to figure out a way how they can also get that onto the card.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And that's just disgusting.
That's in the Creating Parity report, the expansion plans.
I'm going to have to stop you there because we're already halfway through.
No worries.
Okay.
Amanda, it really sounds like this card is limiting the rights of people. So thank you for all those examples, both of you.
Mm-hmm.
We know you've gone through the legislation with a fine-tooth comb. Can you tell us what the legal implications are once you are put on this card?
Okay, well, the first legal implication is the loss of 80% of your payment, as I described earlier. But there's two key concerns, and one is you are removed from your capacity to, I'll put it simply. Indue Limited have ASIC and ACCC exemptions from consumer law. So you are no longer protected by consumer laws, and also from your loss of your data. While the government, they retain the info and it's all your information, it's all under the Privacy Act with the government. Under the terms and conditions that you are forced to sign up to with Indue Limited, you are required to accept that they store your information and on-sell it overseas to Spain, Israel, United States and the European Union. And if you don't comply with these what would be privacy violations in any other sense of the word, you lose access to the Indue account, which would, we haven't actually tested that yet, but that would actually be a constitutional issue because it's a requirement of government to make sure that access is maintained. But so people have no choice, basically. They sign up or they lose access. The Australian Law Council submission is probably the most powerful one that I've read so far. It includes losses, it lists a whole lot of rights that people lose once they get onto the card. The entire program itself is a breach of Article 26 of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. And that is true no matter what justifications that the government has actually put into the program saying it's not. Both the Law Council and the Australian Human Rights Commission agree that the government's justifications for this card under human rights legislation are not satisfactory and don't meet the human rights standards. But where that comes into play is that your rights to equality and non-discrimination go up in smoke. This is a legal form of segregation in a sense, and we call it socioeconomic apartheid, legislated socioeconomic apartheid. But your right to self-determination, which is actually enshrined in law, your right to autonomy, your right to social security and an adequate standard of living is impacted, and the prohibitions on the impact of privacy rights. There's a whole list I could run through, but the ones that affect cardholders on a more real basis are the consumer protections, because it means that I can run to ASIC and make a complaint about Indue. I can run to the Ombudsman and make a complaint, and we actually encourage people to do that as often as they can. But those complaints go nowhere because of the government's justifications for those discriminatory, for the discriminatory. I'm sorry, my speech. For the policy, the government has justified all these limitations on your rights as necessary and essential when they're actually there's nobody in the legal fraternity that actually agrees with that. Under the Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, it says that all persons must be equal, before the law. And it includes a whole range of, against sex, discrimination, race, colour and age. But it also includes national or social origin, and it includes other statuses. So social security income source would be included within that OHCR legislation. The rights, how that plays out on the ground, as I just said, is for people is that there's no access to all the problem solving. If you have a problem with Indue, you can't actually go and get redress. If your money, we have a massive problem amongst cardholders from Seduna right through to the last rollout of the last bill. People have been complaining about money going missing, and there is no oversight. When the issue of profiteering comes up on Indue, the company itself, Kate Campbell recently in the June estimates, Senate estimates, said, profit is a matter for Indue. They don't even check. There's no oversight on the profiteering of the corporation running this program. So in every sense, in privacy, in discrimination. The whole Human Rights Act, we are signatory to the Conventions on Non-Discrimination, rights of protection for women and children, the right to social security are impacted to a degree that is completely unacceptable for any rationale. I do implore people to read the Australian Law Council submission and the Australian Human Rights Commission. For people of First Nations and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as a collective group of people, those rights, also the rights that are removed also include cultural rights, the right to practice culture, because the card limits your movement, where you can go, when you can go. So, people we're finding, like, there were 700 people from the Warburton community outside Kalgoorlie who weren't in the trial region, but when they had their access, removed, arbitrarily, they were put on cards without a notice, and yet they weren't even in the legislated trial region. So a lot of wheeling and dealing is happening behind the scenes that people aren't aware of. These people could not even access food. People coming from outer regions into Kalgoorlie for cultural ceremony, for sorry business, were being put on the card because under the CDP, which is a different program, they have to register at a Centrelink when they arrive in a new town. And that Centrelink in Kalgoorlie was automatically putting them on the card, even though they live thousands of kilometres away. So people were getting captured by the card. This, we call it, as I said to you earlier, the classist, racist card. That is the perfect summation. It impacted First Nations people under NTER first, and it came out as the basics card. And now it's just this morphing of this policy across all the local, all the socio-demographic that is not, and this is going up to people that are earning up to $35,000 a year. So it's low-income workers, part-time workers are already on cards as well. And age pensioners now are on the card as well. So I'll leave it there because I know we've got limited time. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I hope I've answered the question. I'm looking at the questions. I hope I've answered it enough. We can follow up if anybody has any questions we can answer later.
Right. And so Kathryn can tell us briefly how you've heard how pensioners are doing on the card and how it's impacting them.
Well, I mainly hear from the Ceduna and Kalgoorlie region with the older people that are on the card, people that are near pension age. Right, so people like Joycelyn and stuff like that, they're isolated. They end up, they can't partake in a lot of their activities that they used to be able to go and do, because and this applies across the board to anybody as well. Community activities in regional centres are cash based, cash entry at the gate, cash for anything, buying food or taking part on any of the events. So the result is cash markets, cash fruit and veg. All right, people end up being excluded from their community. And with the older people, if you look at the blocked banned businesses, it is very noticeable that the bowls clubs in all the different regions are banned. You know what I mean? Now that aims to the older generation that go and play bowls. Yet the bowls clubs, the sports clubs, are all banned. Basically, the bridge club, anything like that, bingo is banned. So all your social activities are gone, and that's going to cause a lot more problems. We have enough problems with social isolation as it is, but you take away somebody's once a fortnight visit out, that could be really devastating, in my opinion. You know what I mean? So.
Thank you for that, Kathryn. When the card was first introduced, Amanda, in Aboriginal communities, we were all told it was to stop people from drinking and gambling taxpayers' money away. And so I'd like to ask you two questions here. I don't drink or gamble, so can I say no to be put on the card? And the second question is, does the card really stop drinking and gambling?
No, and you'll hear a lot of things attributed to this card, but yes, the public, the media buy was that this card serves to limit alcohol, gambling and drug abuse, which it has never done since the beginning, and the statistics in both evaluations show that. If you even if you don't drink, you can't say no to this card in the sense your payment is already split by the time the card arrives in your mailbox. You're already on the program if your area has been designated a trial zone or a card rollout region. There is no saying no to that income split. It occurs immediately that your region has been announced as a card site. You can choose, as others have, not to activate, but then you will be left with 20% of your income. Now, that's what you have to rely on. That's what you'll have to manage with. And I need to be really clear with people that that is a very difficult thing to do. For the disability pension, which is the highest payment that we have in Australia, it's still only $11 a day cash access over a fortnight period. So we're not talking about a lot of money. The pretext of alcohol, gambling and drug addiction was used to, I've actually used the word to excite social prejudices. This program has, and that's all it was. It was a tool, a mechanism that they used to roll this out. The reality is this program is about wholesale privatisation of the social security system. This is about taking control of cash money in Australia. This has got, people who were actually identified by the department as being at risk were exempted from the trial up until last year. So the people who actually have the problems, we're not even included on the trial. So we're actually been experimenting on a group of people that don't even have the problems that government say that they do. And I need to be very clear on one thing before I finish up. Addiction is a health issue. Okay, addiction is a health issue and has to be treated like that. This card abandons people who do have addictions, who do have problems, who do need help. This card has erased 20 years of community effort to get rid of methylated spirits drinking and huffing and petrol on country. It has ruined 20 years of hard work and effort by thousands of people over the years. It's by bringing all these problems back. All these old problems are now new again. And the newer problem we have is predators flocking to regions where the card rolls out. So people who can't access their drink anymore will take on something like the ice drug where it's cheaper and far more addictive and costing far more. People are being preyed upon by exploitative locals as much as, one local businessman was arrested for holding people's cards, so it's everyone from the top down. And I must include, because today is Child Abuse Awareness Week. It's this whole week is Child Abuse Awareness Week, that children have become prey to predators as well, offering alcohol and cigarettes and money, cash money, because they can no longer go to the show because mum hasn't got the cash. All right. Women have been forced into bartering bodies for rent. They're literally having to sell. And I don't want to approach these. It's difficult for me to actually speak about these issues in front of you, but I'm sure these aren't the first time you've heard it, Shirley. This is not, this is how countries like Bangladesh become countries like Bangladesh. They strip the rights of women away. Women's empowerment is stripped in the community. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yes, I want to go on then. I'm going to go to the last question that I'd prepared here. Kathryn, we know that older women are the fastest growing cohort among homeless people in Australia. And can you tell us why this card makes the situation worse? We have a minute before I really want to ask other people questions, but we would like to know about older women in relation to this.
I think the biggest issue would be share housing, right, and access to specialists and doctors and medical stuff, right. I think that would be the biggest issue for older women, right, and of course the issue of the stigma, the humiliation of having to deal with some 20-year-old jumped up little call center person being condescending and telling you what's what. You know what I mean? But yeah, I think the share housing issue would be the biggest problem.
Let's leave it there, because you've all told us some horrific tales. So Amanda, in half a minute, can you say why there isn't a class action to stop the government from forcing this card onto the population?
Okay, I used all my savings to get this advice, so I can tell you that the reason is that this isn't like robo-debt, which was found unlawful, okay, and a class action was able to be started. This card is law. It's in the law and justified. Okay, it can only be legislated out. That's the only way it can be done. We have had lawyers for 6 years going around trying to find a way to do this, but you have to remember the NLP outsourced this policy, writing of this policy, to some of the best legal minds in the country. And I know because we paid $79 million for the consultancy in order for the task force that developed this card. So, but advice from human rights lawyers is it can only be legislated out. Advice from a QC that I personally asked and paid for time for was it can only be legislated out. And Shine lawyers, we have had some support, and that they want to support, but there's no way for them to support. There may be some terms under the ASIC letter and the ASIC guidelines where people can individually take on cases, but ultimately it can't. That's why there's no, because it's law, because it's been passed by both houses of parliament and is in the law, a class action or a high court challenge must start from inside the ministry, and a class action must begin after that this is a $500,000 a minute sit down conversation that you actually have to have, that we simply can't afford. If there's a loophole, we'll find it, but there's moments that all the lawyers that we've spoken to have not been able to find it. So
thank you both, and you'll have to now answer 26 questions. We won't have time for all of that. Some of them might have been answered. Now, Kirsten Anker said, how much cash can you draw on your card?
You don't get to draw money on the card at all.
No.
You don't get to draw any money from the 80% of your income at all. It's you cannot transfer cash from the Indue account to your private bank account. You can't do that.
Well, you can, but you have to get permission.
Sorry. Yeah, there are certain circumstances.
Right, and you get $200 every 28 days, unless you're in the Northern Territory. That doesn't apply, and most First Nations people, they won't let them do it. But your 20% goes into your normal bank account. Okay, that's where you get your 20% from, and the 80% is on the Indue card, and you cannot put an Indue card into an ATM machine and draw cash on it.
Yeah,
simple.
Thank you for that. Now, what oversight is in place for the Indue card?
None.
There's
no oversight. To be fair, the department itself oversees, in a broad term, the running of the program. They supply information through Senate estimates that is usually obtuse and not relevant to the process. But there is, the department's goal is to get people on the card. As far as Indue Limited is concerned, there is no oversight, and Kate Campbell admitted such in Senate estimates in June. So there's no oversight on profiteering. There's none of that. So
Diane would like to know whether you can pay online for exercise classes.
Kathryn?
I don't know. It would depend on if the payment comes up as PayPal, no. As a direct debit, you would have to get permission from Indue, depending on the company, right? We would tell people just do it through your 20%, because Indue are not very good at paying direct debits on time. The ones that they do approve.
The direct debit process is really tricky. Indue select which ones they will pay and which ones they will honour and not, and then people are being let down because there's non-payment. This is how people are getting into debt. They're not getting paid. Direct debits aren't getting paid on time, so families incur a late fee. Loan payments aren't getting paid on time. So Indue is very bad at what it does. Even if this was the perfect program being run in the perfect way, someone who is not leased would still be 6 weeks behind in their rent within a 6-month period, just because of their cycles. So they're not very good at being financial managers.
Right, I'm going to rush through these. Will there be reviews on the current rollout of the Indue card, and who'll be conducting these? Did we cover that?
I can actually, in the last bill, December 2020, there was, the government removed the last of the independent evaluations. Now the only people going to review this card are the Liberal Party. So take what you want from that. We didn't get to the age pension question, which I think is really important before we actually do finish up, if that's all right, Shirley.
Of course it is.
Yeah, I would just like to, people have been hearing lots of misinformation from the department, from other people about the age pension and its positions on the card. I need to make it clear to everyone out there that there are age pensioners on this card right now already in Cape York region. There are 20 age pensioners on the card, 14 of whom are on the card compulsorily. They did not have a choice. They were referred by the Families Responsibility or Queensland Commission, which is not a voluntary process. That commission is ultimately overseen by the government. So as much as Anne Ruston would like to divest herself of responsibility for putting these people on the card, the fact is her policy has put them on the card. There's a lot of misinformation coming from the department, a lot of redirection on the media, but what it boils down to is they're already on the card, and the payment, the age pension payment for the first time is now in the legislation as a mandatory restrictable payment, which means it is now subject to forced quarantine for the first time in the whole of the program's history. That's why we've been jumping up and down trying to make people understand. Yeah. Because up until now, the age pension's only been a voluntary payment, which you could choose to go on the card or off the card, depending on your needs. December's passing of the bill changed all of that. It is now age pensioners are called program participants, not volunteers, program participants, and they are already on the card. One line in the text, Shirley, one line caveat in each of the other regions is what prevents the age pension being rolled out wider. The only thing limiting it, there is no promises in the legislation that says we promise never to roll it out to age pension. There is no promise or statement in the legislation that says we will not expand further in future. So any promises Liberals are making now, and the National Party especially, because they're the ones pushing for national expansion, you know, it's the case of whatever promises are being made now are just that. Promises from a party that has already broken, 970 promises already. So yeah, I needed to make that clear because older women need to know what they're trusting. ALP and the Greens and Australian Progressives are trying their hardest to undermine this legislation and to inform people. So your vote will empower any government in office not to either uphold or not uphold the law. That's the power that you give. The only reason this card exists today is because government has chosen to not enforce laws like consumer laws that it should be enforcing. The consumer laws that protect you today don't protect a card holder today simply because they're not being enforced. Yep. So when you vote, please remember that you are giving whoever goes to power the right not to enforce the law, not just the right to enforce it. So thank you. I hope that sort of closes up the session.
Answers your question, Suzanne Rennie. So thank you for that. There's an important one here. If you've both spoken about these matters before the Senate, what reasons are given for taking no action? At least on the most egregious of them.
Kathryn, would you like to start that answer? Like, why are the government not taking action? We've provided all this information to Senate.
They just ignore it.
Procedurally, it's because the committees are generally run by the NLP. Whoever's in office gets in charge of the committees. So the committee will pass it. It's important for people to read the dissenting bills.
So each Senate inquiry that I've taken place in, all the submissions have come in, and basically there's only 6 or so supporting submissions from
138 against
vested interests. Only the vested interests are heard. Everybody else's submissions are there, but because it's a Liberal Senate inquiry, the numbers are stacked. So even though there's Labor and Greens people and the other independents come in, right, even if they all got together and voted, the Liberals still have the numbers, so they just pass it through anyway.
Yeah, so a report is passed, but there are often the ALP and Greens will post dissenting reports. Yes. So what the committee says and what actually goes on in the room are two different things.
Look, there are some good questions in this list And I hope, Amanda and Kathryn, you will go through them and type answers, because I understand there is going to be a copy of this sent to all of the people who registered, not only just the ones who are here today. Is that right, Beverly? Because I'm about to hand over to you.
If somebody could save the chat, that would be really good. That way I could do it. There's
also some good things and positive things being said to you both about this very issue. So I'm now going to thank you both for your helpful advice and thank everybody else for their participation. For one, I've learned a lot about the Indue Card, and I'd like to thank the CEO of OWN New South Wales, Yumi, who has done so much preparation for this wonderful seminar. So, President of both Known and OWN New South Wales, Beverly Baker, would you please officially thank our two speakers and close our seminar?
I would. Thank you. I am stumped. Gobsmacked, I think, is the word I'm looking for. I knew this thing was bad, but I did not know how bad. And the fact that over 60% of people on this card are not Aboriginal people. The whole marketing of this card was used as a racist wedge to say, well, we all know about that. And the reality is that it is predominantly non-Aboriginal people who are on this card, who are being insulted and who are suffering. I was a single mother. I raised 3 daughters on my own. And I am so grateful that no one was so hateful that they would want to put me on this card. My children would not be the amazing contributors to their society as they are now, had my options been limited to this. I was able to negotiate in my community. I was able to talk to my friends, the shopkeepers who knew me. I was able to work with the schools so that the kids could go on their excursions. We could juggle and manage the money. And because of that, my kids are all professional women. They are all active contributors to their society. Had I been tied to this, their lives would have been vastly different. And I doubt that I would have survived it through the shame and the humiliation of having to deal with the ostracisation and the name calling that we see going on around this card today. Thank you so much for opening my eyes even further, even though it is burning my brain to pieces. Thank you again, Shirley, for your awesome moderation of this very, very difficult and emotional seminar. And thank you both, Amanda and Kathryn, for the enormous energy and effort that you have put in to try and understand and impart the dreadful impact this card will have on older women, on 60% of the people who are on the aged pension, because they live for anything up to 4 to 5 years longer than their male partners, and they retire with less than half the superannuation that men currently do. So the impact on this card is not only racist, it's sexist. So thank you very, very much for your time and your effort. Thank you everyone for participating. I really hope this has put steel in your spine to know that we now have to let this government know, and any government that might follow it. This is not acceptable at any level, at any time, ever. Thank you so very, very much, everyone.